playing with all the offseason stuff. It's kind of weird in a lot of ways. I guess, how are you feeling after the Steelers' loss against Buffalo? How are you feeling just as a Steelers fan, putting aside, being a podcast and Steelers writer?
Well, I told you last week, I felt strangely calm, which anytime before playoffs is very unusual for me. But I thought it was a pleasant surprise that they were there. After they lost those 3 games in a row, and then they turned around and won 3 games in a row under Mason Rudolph. And I knew it really wasn't going to impact a lot of the way the roster is configured next season. So I really went into it just looking forward to seeing how Rudolph would do and how all the young guys, the first and second year players would do, because it matters to them more than it does, to a lot of the other guys. Because if you're a contender, that matters to TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, these older guys, Minka Fitzpatrick, established guys. But everybody kind of knew they were not a Super Bowl contender, especially with TJ Watt out injured. Now they're 1-11 when TJ Watt doesn't play. So, without him, it's the odds were they were going to lose. So I just relaxed and enjoyed it. And I see some good things. I see some really bad things like tackling, or lack thereof. But I tell you, I'll be honest, since the end of the game and when Tomlin walked out of the presser to today's end of season press conference with Tomlin, we see a different Mike Tomlin.
I was about to say, I've noticed that.
He was much more in control. He was relaxed. He was optimistic. I got that feeling from that. He was optimistic about the future. And he admitted things that he didn't like to admit all season or in past years. Coaching things need to change. In-house discipline and rules need to change. He come out and said that Faulkner and Sullivan are not candidates to be the next offensive coordinator. It needs to be out of house, which is something we've talked about is desperately needed. He talked about Mason Rudolph, and he talked about Kenny Pickett, and he gave him Pickett a vote of confidence. But as I said, people have been telling me, well, they got to bring back Rudolph. They got to bring – I'm fine, but he's only a good fit in some offenses. And until we get an offensive coordinator, we don't know who's going to fit. You have to get the best quality offensive coordinator and then, revamp this offensive roster to fit what we want it to fit. What we've been doing is backwards. We've been putting pieces in place and then trying to make them work and make them fit. And it doesn't work that way. And we're at a perfect opportunity with a very young and inexpensive offense to get the right coordinator and then fill in the pieces.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think from my perspective, what you said there about Mike Tomlin, I want to throw out something that a lot of people aren't talking about, or I've not heard anyone say. I think he's relieved, to be honest.
That it's over.
Yeah, I think – no. In a good way, though. He can't –
In a good way, yes. But, I mean, it was a frustrating year for him, no doubt.
Correct, right? And I think that from the point of view that the perspective of he couldn't make he's a loyal guy, couldn't make the Canada change till things got to a certain level. Couldn't bring someone in that. And you said all along the Steelers were playing under the Matt Canada game plan offensively. They couldn't do anything about that. So he had to put together something to get there. He had unprecedented injuries at inside linebacker, right? I listened to Pump Your Brakes you do with Steel Curtain Network. So glad to hear you guys talk about drafting someone in inside linebacker position, right? Important. But he had all those injuries there. He had a bunch of guys playing in the secondary that like that were either veterans or old or, injured or that wasn't good either, right? He then has a situation where there was a lot of talk about his contract. They'd spent all this money on Trubisky. He wasn't turned out to be the guy. Kenny Pickett was injured a lot. Yes, he turned to Mason Rudolph a game or two too late, but he was kind of forced, as we said at the time, that as soon as they went past Trubisky was gone. That was a final decision they were basically making on Trubisky's time in Pittsburgh. Fine. I just think he's got a chance now. And you and I have talked about Colbert stuffing him up. I know that's something that came up on your Pump Your Brakes podcast as well. I just think they had an okay free agency. I agree with you that I think some of Khan's moves are overplayed in terms of what they did. But they had a very good draft, right? Yeah. And draft was the thing that most people said, oh, he's not going to be able to judge talent like Kevin Colbert can, and they've lost Brandon Hunt. Well, actually, it's turned out to be a very different scenario, right? So I just get the feeling that Mike Tomlin is relieved from all of this because now they've got a chance to go ahead and do it again. They've found a cheap solution in Mason, and you hit the nail on the head. Not every offense is right with Mason, but you know what? Like, and I've talked about that. I've got an article. It's probably still sitting there on Steel Curtain Network, behindthesteelcurtain.com. Sorry, because obviously it's a different thing. Where I talked about Mason Rudolph. I did a big deep dive into the air raid offense. People can Google that. And Mason Rudolph has never had a QB coach or a Steelers offense that is based around the air raid. If they choose that they don't think Kenny Pickett's the guy, and they do think Mason Rudolph's the guy, or they think there's someone in college, a lot of college guys playing some version of an air raid offense, they can go out and look for an OC. I'm not saying this is what they're going to do, but they can go look for someone that fits that style of offense, right? Yeah. I'm not saying they necessarily will leave them with what Kenny Pickett fits, but now they get the chance to do it. I just get the sense that Mike Tomlin is a relieved guy, and I think he gets to go back to doing what he loves best, which is team building. I think a Steelers fan wrote this in the comments of the Steelers press conference. He wrote, people pretend that Mike Tomlin has the same power that Bill Belichick had. Mike Tomlin is not the GM. And I don't think anyone summed it up as perfectly that. He's not the GM. Yes, he influences decisions, but he doesn't choose everything that happens. Art Rooney does a lot of that. So I think there's a lot of blame that's placed on Tomlin because a lot of people just go, oh, well, he makes every decision. He doesn't. I personally believe he had to get to a point where he got to go to Art Rooney II and say, hey, Canada ain't it, right? That's what I personally believe. People call me an apologist. That's just what I believe from all the things that I know as factual information. Darkstorm brings it up in the live chat about Colbert being overrated. That I totally agree. But as I say, I think Mike Tomlin is relieved, and I'll shut up in a moment, but I think he's relieved to be able to go into the offseason and try and refresh this team.
Something you said there I've been thinking a lot about since the game ended. The rumors that we get and we've been hearing at Steel Curtain Network was that Tomlin, the decision to hire Canada and the decision to fire Canada was not Tomlin's decisions. Now, I said it on the Pump Your Brakes. If that's true, and I've been as successful, won a title, 17 years, I believe black and gold, and they did not give me any more say in that manner, I would consider not doing an extension as well. But you've seen a guy today that seemed like he was really invested, that he was excited about the future. I'm going to throw this out there. And here's why. If we look at Kevin Colbert's last 10 drafts, they're subpar, Daniel. I mean, Matty, they are subpar. His last 10 drafts. This year, with Omar Khan, who's a numbers guy, more than he is a talent evaluator. The talent evaluator is Andy Weidel.
Yeah.
But does anybody in the Steeler organization love the pre-draft process of player evaluation more than Mike Tomlin?
No.
So therefore, Colbert was not around last year. So Tomlin right up there on the circuit, visiting all the pro days, everything like he always does, at the combine, everywhere. And then Khan and Waddle, I believe Tomlin had more say this year.
I agree too.
So you take those three individuals that were new to the process as far as the amount of say they had in what players they wanted to bring in. And they had their best draft in maybe the second best draft in franchise history. Now they're looking at an offensive coordinator And Tomlin said that obviously Khan and Waddle and the Rooney's are all going to be involved. They're going to – I think there's going to be better communication, more open lines of communication. And I don't think Tomlin is going to – I think he's going to have more say than he ever had under Colbert. And if that is the case, Tomlin is great as a talent evaluator as far as during that pre-draft process. He is a great rapport with these young men, and he's a good judge of character. Their intensity. I don't know if you remember, he asked Gonzalez, the quarterback that went to the Patriots. Yep. He asked him a question, and when Gonzalez gave him the answer, he said he's off the board. He was no longer a first-round consideration.
Well, there's the whole he took Malik Willis for wings. He took other people for steak. I reckon he did the same thing with Willis. I reckon he knew straight away with Willis that's not the guy. Straight away.
Yeah, but I think that he has a way of feel. Like I used to do interviews for work. I would interview employees, and you could tell from a few questions, is this guy going to fit? Does he have that work ethic, that drive to do what we're going to ask him to do? And I think Tomlin's good at that. And it's great when he can be your head coach, is one of your best talent evaluators. So I'm willing to give Tomlin a pass on some of these bad drafts because I think Kevin Colbert called the final shots.
Well, and I think I always hear the Mike Tomlin won with cowards players thing.
Yeah.
Well, I think Kevin Colbert, I'm not saying his drafts were terrible overall. He drafted a number of guys that will be in the Hall of Fame or are Hall of Famers. But he hit on Troy Polamalu and he hit on Ben. And Ben bought Colbert a lot of time in the role, right? If they had only won one of those Super Bowls, Colbert wouldn't have lasted that long in Pittsburgh.
No, he wouldn't be a legend either.
No. So
and they really lucked into being Roethlisberger.
Correct.
Because I had Roethlisberger as the number one quarterback that year, over Eli and over Phillip Rivers. But obviously a couple of teams had him the third. And so when he fell to the Steelers, they looked into that. Because I don't think they would have done what they done with these other quarterbacks because of the configuration of that offensive line. Ben did things superhuman that the other two guys couldn't have done.
Yeah.
So, it was a perfect confluence of events that they kind of looked into it. He looked into being taken by the perfect franchise for his skill set. You see what I'm saying? Sometimes
and I also find it
fortune,
And I also find it funny because, people always talk about, Kenny Pickett. And I'm like, and yes, you and I have talked about that Tomlin wanted a mobile quarterback, although there's been plenty more mobile quarterbacks than Kenny Pickett.
Yeah.
But what if Kenny Pickett's a Colbert pick? Right? If Kenny Pickett's a Colbert pick, right, and Khan and Mike Tomlin are stuck with that one, because remember, Colbert wrote out that draft, right? A lot of people blame that on Mike T and the Steelers organization. What if that's a Colbert pick? Right? We don't know. When Omar Khan has been asked that, he has said, it's a group decision. He's given a standard line of it's a group decision. We'll find out in time, who's responsible for that pick. But it's never been admitted whose pick that was, right? And the Steelers, all those men that we've just talked about are upstanding blokes that will never pass blame on someone else. Everyone will take shared responsibility for it. Yeah. But someone is ultimately responsible for that selection. And yes, it could have been a group decision of, hey, we know what and that's the other thing too is a lot of people, I find it interesting with some of the debate amongst fans, and we're all fans here, so this is just another fan's perspective. But I find it interesting how binary everyone makes it. It's either or black and white people make it. It's either this or it's that. But there's never gray area. What if they went, no, Kenny Pickett's not, that quarterback class was not as talented as previous years. However, we know what we're getting in Kenny Pickett. That will work for a few years. He'll be serviceable. It's cheap. We can retain our defense. We can play some of our best players and put pieces around him. If they had that mature conversation, then fine. And if that's not worked out, that's not worked out. I agree, though, as we've talked about a billion times over, is We don't know because we've not put Kenny Pickett in a position to win in the right offense. So that's what you've got to do in 24. But you have to have another quarterback choice, and you have to have Kenny Pickett adhere to an offense that should suit him, not base hiring an offensive coordinator around him, because he's not a generational quarterback. As good as he might be or as bad as he might be, he's not a generational quarterback. So you make sure that you hedge your bets and you set him up for success as best you can, and you create competition. And honestly, from what I heard out of Mike Tomlin in this morning, my time's press conference, or this afternoon in the US, I think that's where they're headed, which is all good news.
Oh, I mean, I'm glad that Tomlin's in discussions. He ended the debate. He is coming back next year. I'd like to know if he's going to do a 2-year extension, or it sounds like the Rooneys intend to sign him to a longer extension.
Well, I said in my show that I put out on the channel this morning, I expect him to sign a 3-year extension.
Yeah, I think it will be longer than 2 years, yes. And so that will impact what kind of offensive coordinator they're looking for. Because you could get a guy, because of the incredible job security of being the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, if he's planning on walking away in 2 to 3 years, and this offensive coordinator is very successful in Pittsburgh, he could step in. And so you could always say that, like when Butler stepped in for LeBeau, or it's happened in other places.
Yeah.
So now the next step, in my opinion, is to get the offensive coordinator. And there's a few candidates out there people are talking about.
Yeah, well, let's get into that when you want to.
Yeah, but get the right guy. And then, because here's the important thing. He might be like, okay, Pickett is not a good fit. Rudolph is a good fit. But there might be a guy that, in that mid to late first round that he says, that guy fits. Now me personally, I would like to build the team and then worry about getting the quarterback.
Well, I did too. I said after the Bills. I said my reaction takeaway show after the Bills.
Yeah.
They have to fix the O-line first. Before they do anything, fix the O-line.
And the D-line. But the thing is, if that opportunity's there and a guy falls down there to, say, 17, 18, and you're picking 20 like they are, you're like, let's move up and get him because the offensive coordinator really likes him. So that's why you got to have that guy in place.
Yeah.
Because that is an intimate relationship that you have to be successful. We look at the teams left, and we look at the teams that win Super Bowls. There's a real special elite head coach quarterback connection.
Yep.
Most Super Bowls are won by that connection. And right now, since Mia got older and they didn't have a defense when they had the Killer Bees and all that stuff, because Colbert couldn't make the move, couldn't pull the trigger and be aggressive to build that defense.
Yep.
They missed some opportunities. Yeah, but they had Ben, Bell, Brown. I mean, good gosh. I mean, what a talented offense, but the defense was subpar. So, but now they're in a situation where they can do this again, because I think you've got the coach. Now you need the offensive coordinator, you need the quarterback, and then let's go to war, baby.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so, totally. I think that's definitely the situation. I think, and the other thing I think about that too is, like, when are this is all going to happen pretty quickly. I think a lot of people are sitting there going, how's this? And now Tomlin was asked about this question in the Kelly Cup. So.
I was reading that, yeah.
No, she got us last week on live when I was doing the one with Marky D, and then she tries to throw us off. But Cameron Hayward might retire, but I don't know who Cameron Hayward is. Let's just say that, mate, you, Kelly. But going in terms of that, I think Tomlin will sign pretty quickly. And I think the other situation is that with the 3-year deal, and I also think that the Steelers will have to hire an OC pretty quickly to make the most of this draft process, because if they definitely think that there's someone in there that's going to fall in the first or the second round at quarterback, and there's legitimately 6 to 8 decent quarterbacks in this draft, you need to get that person in from the get-go and start making that judgment, right? So, and because that's going to judge too whether Mason Rudolph, as you say, fits that offense. Now, you guys talked about on Pump Your Brakes paying Mason $7 or $8 million. I think a base of like 4 or 5 with incentives on top for 3 or 8 for another 2 or 3 to make him 7 or 8? Maybe. But like, I'm not paying $10 million for Mason Rudolph, right? A lot of people are like, sign him up, right? I'm like, no, like, we know Kenny Pickett can service that if your plan is to actually draft someone. So I think the quarterback question is really key, but we are not going to know. There's going to be a domino effect of things that happen for the Steelers. They'll sign the OC, then they'll sign Mike Tomlin up for however many years. Then they'll sign the OC, or those two things may be even announced in tandem. And then they'll go ahead and work out what they do at quarterback. But between now and the end of Feb, when that happens over the next 5 weeks, that's a lot of stuff to get done, right? And they need to work out on defense, because Mike Tomlin didn't rule out changes on the defensive side either. If people read between the lines of his press conference today,
coaches.
He did.
Coaches, plural.
And I think there was one point where he said on both. I don't know whether he said specifically on both sides of the ball, but he used similar language, right? Yeah. I don't think they're going to get rid of Terrell Austin. Jed Evell commented in that earlier in the show I did earlier. I think that Terrell Austin should be given I don't think he should be re-signed. I think he should be given 1 year to prove himself. I said, if you're pricking between Grady Brown and Terrell Austin, like if you're at risk of losing Grady Brown, then I'd freaking promote him and get rid of Austin in a heartbeat. I think he's an awesome guy in the future. But I think you've got to tackle your biggest problem first, right? Yeah. And I think that's why it's obviously offense. And I've said it for so long, like, if you're not going to score 30 points or be capable of scoring 30 points, maybe you don't score it because you kneel out the game, or you just go for a field goal at the end of the game. If you're not capable of scoring 30 points in half the games you play in a season, you're never going to be in the AFC Championship game. And that's what we saw from the Steelers this year. We saw them make it to the playoffs and scrape through. We saw them get to double-digit wins. But we didn't see them go as far as they could have, like some of the other AFC teams. And going back to the Bills, I know we talked about good things and bad things. Can we please get a strong freaking safety? I've gone on about it on, I think, every second video that I've done on this channel for a year now, almost. We're almost 11 months of the channel. And why? My example always is stopping tight ends. My example always is the Bills are the first one I throw up. It used to be because of Dawson Knox, and now this year I've said Kincaid and Knox. Well, what happened? The tight ends for the Bills ripped us apart. You've got Kansas City that have Kelsey. You've got guys like that, like Goddard from Miami. There's Mark Andrews. There's a heap of tight ends, but you're never going to stop that without a proper freaking strong safety. Like, that is something that Shannon and I probably talk a lot about between now and the draft. There'll be draft prospects. There'll be free agent guys. I think they need to get someone young, Terrell Edmonds 2.0, but better. I really like a guy called James Williams out of Miami, 6'5", like 218 plus pounds. We need to get someone like that can learn from Minka and that can actually stop these guys, because that's how you get behind quickly in games, really quickly.
The tackling, or lack thereof, against the Bills was hideous. Fitzpatrick, he's got one hand, that he has the cast off, but he still has the broken finger. And you seen him try to tackle. He couldn't tackle. Peterson is not a safety. He does not tackle well. I mean, it was incredibly bad. Rowe was the only safety they had that could tackle.
And he's earned a second contract in my book.
If they could have had Edmonds, then Minka wouldn't have been forced to make all them tackle attempts. And you wouldn't have had to have a guy like Peterson trying to be a hybrid corner safety, and it just wasn't working. I mean, he gives a great effort, but the guy's toast. It's over. They need to move on.
Yeah, I think they'll keep him as like a veteran presence. I think maybe they look at possibly some stuff in the slot. Not that I'm saying that's where I would play him. I'm just saying I think that's where they'll go with him.
But that's one of the changes they need to make.
Yeah.
Because somebody told me, said, well, Robertson, he give him such great veteran leadership? He give him little else. I mean, he can block a little bit, but he's no longer an NFL caliber receiver. Yeah. He's got to go.
Well, he can't sit there. Like, we're going to save $10 million on the cap. They need that $10 million to get another tackle.
That's what I'm saying. Peterson, he got to go. Everybody comes to that point. Now, if you have a certain type team and you're really young, you can have a guy like that as a veteran presence. Here's the thing. The Steelers are the second highest paid defense, and they're the oldest defense.
Yep.
Can't be. That's got to change.
I did a show on their spending on offense and defense back mid-season. I think it was week 8. And I talked about that literal thing. Is the defense living up to their salary cap? And next year, they're going to be the second highest paid defense. Literally did that. Speaking of that, you're wearing the jersey of Cam Hayward, I presume. That's one on my list for when he retires. I've got too many jerseys already at the moment. But from my perspective, obviously he's got a big cap number next year. He talked about wanting to be back, the mind and the body. I think Tomlin said he's firmly back, I think Cam will be back. You've talked about that cap hit. Other people talked about that cap hit. I expect them to do a restructure with voidable years. That's how I think they'll get around it. I don't think they're not going to pay him. The Steelers are pretty good at paying their people. But is there a rough amount that I'm going to ask you 2 questions with regards to Cam Hayward? Is there a rough amount that you'd be happy with per year, and considering and whether that's avoidable contracts with stuff deferred? And part 2 of the question is, do you think they need to start managing snaps better? I know that comes down to what other personnel that they have, but I'm a big believer, and Mark and I talked about this back before this channel was created. We were talking about it with Steel Curtain Network about with the 17-game season, snaps need to be managed. And that's not something that I think the Steelers have done very well in the first couple of years of 17 games. I don't think they manage their snaps well. I don't think enough guys are healthy enough toward the end of the year. But anyway, I'll throw those 2 questions to you.
Well, huge fan, obviously, wearing the jersey. But Steelers come first. As I've always said, I have no agenda when it comes to players. The Steelers come first. And I've watched guys that was my favorite players at the time, Woodson and Lloyd and different guys, go and play elsewhere. And it was their right, their decision. It was the right decision for them. They made more money. They had an opportunity. You have to do what's best for you. But as a fan, the Steelers come first. Now, was Cam Hayward, next year he's due $22 million. Was he a $22 million player? No. Was Cam Hayward a $10 million a year player? No. Was Cam Hayward a $5 million a year player? Maybe. Now, the injury was the big part.
Jeez, I'd love to hear what you had to say about Ogunjobi.
Yeah, but the injury obviously was a big reason.
Yeah.
But that's what happens when you're 34, 35 years old.
Yep.
So I don't like the void years.
Neither do I.
Because I think a lot of people mad. But I mean, Kevin Colbert kicked the can down the road. Yep. Kicked the can down the road. 2020 happened. COVID happened. The reduced salary cap happened, and the Steelers were gutted because they kept kicking crap down the road.
Yep.
Now Khan and Waddle have cleaned that up. So I don't want void years. I don't want the can kicked down the road. Either Cam Hayward plays for a reasonable contract or Cam Hayward got to go. Now, I hate to say that, and I don't want to be the bad guy here, but I love Cam Hayward. But you was not a benefit to the Pittsburgh Steelers this year. I mean, the man is not the type of leader that inspires respect. Because when that insanity was going on, even though he wasn't playing, he was there within the locker room, within the organization. He had no say in it. He could not do anything.
Well, I feel like he was too busy doing a podcast. I don't know.
Well, but they all do that now.
I know, but I don't understand. Look, I know it's rich coming from me. Those guys play football. Those guys know. But quite honestly, and I know they've got free time and it's better than them going out, on the alcohol and all that sort of stuff. But I just sit there. I'm like, I don't know. It doesn't sit right. It actually doesn't sit right with me. Like, you're paid to play.
You can do both.
Yeah.
But he's not that type of leader. I mean, the man does incredible things in the community. He's a community leader. He cares. He gives back to the community. But I'm talking about leadership in that locker room.
Correct.
He is not like Aaron Smith was an impressive leader, very quiet. But if you listen to players talk, he was a leader in that locker room. Brett Kiesel, another type of leader. James Harrison, different type. But Greg Lloyd scared the crap out of guys. They were scared to screw up and mess up and act a fool because he would get a hold of them.
Well, I don't even think Cam Hayward and all respect to him, I don't even know if he's the leader that Minka Fitzpatrick is. Minka's the one taking on DJ in the dressing room.
Minka is trying, but you need that guy to be. It's better if it's one of your veteran, grizzled, respected guys, and that should be Cam Hayward.
Is it?
But it just isn't. But all I'm saying is he understands what he brought to the team this year. And I think he said his heart and his mind, wasn't it, that he hoped he'd have in it to play next year. But I think he really needs to say his heart, his mind, and his wallet, because it's an ego thing. When they come to him and they say, we need you to take this massive restructure. And because I don't want to kick the can down the road in the void. I agree. And I think that ego is going to kick in.
But I think they will. I think they will do the void years.
I don't want him to do that, man.
I know. I think it's robbing Peter to pay Paul. But I do think they'll do that. I just think
they need every penny to rebuild. They got a lot of holes.
I know.
They got a lot of holes. So if they keep that, that makes sense when you had Ben and you had some of the guys they had that you could make a run, get hot in the playoffs. They're not there. So I think it does not make sense to add the void years just to keep him around.
Totally agree. I just think I think that's the way they're gonna play it. But I do agree with you in that they've got to have an honest conversation and say, do you want to win a Super Bowl or do you want to get paid? Because if you want to get paid, you're probably going to have to go elsewhere. If you want to win a Super Bowl and get paid, well, you're, again, probably going to have to go elsewhere. If you want to try and win a Super Bowl, then give us the money to make it happen, right? And I don't think Ben did that enough, but I do think Ben was put into that position because, as you say, Colbert kept pushing that back. So I see both sides to the argument.
But also as a quarterback, if you give him a halfway decent offensive line, which the Steelers didn't, so he had no running game, which every old quarterback needs that. And he didn't even have the receivers he had before.
Correct.
But as a quarterback, that's the one position on the field that you have enough influence to justify the amount of money.
Correct.
You when you go into every season, off season, you set aside so much money if you've got an established quarterback. You set it aside. If you take it out of the cap, you don't even worry about it.
Yeah.
But now they don't have that anymore.
Yeah.
And you can't pay Watt, Hayward, and Fitzpatrick.
And Highsmith not cheap.
And Highsmith make up like 30% of their cap or more. You can't have that.
No. And that's why I think Highsmith's in an interesting spot next year because either the Steelers get better at rotating and get an even more potent defense than what they've had this year in terms sack-wise and tackles for a loss and quarterback hits, or I think in 2025, if Herbig comes on enough, I wonder whether Highsmith isn't here in 2025. I think it could be a really interesting situation. But I did want to bring up Reginald Rivers' live chat comment. Reginald said, he says, Shannon, should the Steelers draft a quarterback in the middle rounds, the Tulane and South Carolina QBs could be available. I don't know if you've had a look into those quarterback guys yet, but I do know about the guy in Tulane. He looks like an interesting situation.
I'm not at that part of my for me, it starts like the week before the combine, through the combine, and then I start, seeing who I want to spend more time, who would be a better fit for the Steelers. Because I actually do my draft evaluations, how they're going to fit the Steelers. I couldn't care less how they fit the rest of the NFL. So that's why when people say, well, you recommended this guy and that guy, man, they look like they would be great Steelers. Or Highsmith or Benton, guys that worked out. They'll say, how did you? I said, because after you do the study and to do your evaluations, you see they are perfect Steelers. They fit. But something you said there just a second ago, when you talk about Highsmith, I've been Team Highsmith since day one. But I remember a Patriots team that missed out on the Super Bowl. They had some holes. They had some money situations. They traded Chandler Jones to the Cardinals. And everybody's like, you just traded away the best pass rusher in the AFC. Well, guess what? They went on to win more Super Bowls. You have to be smart when you got that salary cap and you got the situation that you have certain contracts come up at the same time or on the horizon. And if you got Herbig behind him and Herbig looks like the real deal, what can you get out of an Alex Highsmith?
Yeah.
And that's why you see less and less guys retire only playing for one team.
Totally.
Now, the Steelers do that very commonly, more than anybody. And I've always loved that. But also, they haven't won anything in forever.
Yeah.
So something's got to change.
Well, and TJ Watt's untouchable. I think he's a career stealer. So,
Who's that?
TJ Watt. I think
TJ,
he's a career.
Yeah.
I think he's a career stealer. I think that's definitely the case. In talking about that Bills game, there's 18 players that are either going to be unrestricted free agents, restricted free agents, exclusive rights free agents, and that doesn't include 6 guys that I think that the Steelers should cut. And so I think from that perspective, if the Steelers of those 18 guys are going to bring back 4 or 5 blokes, who are those 4 or 5 guys that you want them to bring back?
Well, we did talked about it on one of the podcasts, but I don't have the list in front of me now. But they was 4 or 5 guys that I thought they definitely want to bring back, and then a lot of them but like I said, if I'd have known, I'd have pulled the list up. But
yeah,
because some of the guys, it's time. I mean, I've been let's say Miles Boykin. I've been a huge supporter of his because he's inexpensive. He's the best gunner, I think, in the NFL.
Oh, mate, he's at the ball. He's at the ball as soon as it lands.
But the problem is they refuse to throw him the ball. So I don't know if his hands are that bad, he's that bad a route runner, or what it is. But
I think it is the route running because I think he's got great hands. I think he can combat catch.
When you look at the Steelers, everybody's talking. I would like an upgrade over Johnson. We'll have to see what is available if somebody did want to trade for him. Pickens needs to mature, but the talent's there. But the rest of that, Calvin Austin finally caught a touchdown.
I was about to say, could there be a big year that Calvin Austin is then the X factor or the big question? Because if Calvin Austin is a true number 3, and obviously they're going to get a wide receiver in the 4th to 6th round.
They need 2 of them.
But they probably need, as you say, right? So then they're not spending money on an expensive free agent that way because wide receivers are expensive. Having said that, I'd love to see a big body guy like a DJ Chalk in this offense, but another big guy to complement the tall tight ends and Pickens' height. But I would say, if Calvin Austin is not going to be a legit number 3 third wide receiver for them, then that's another problem that's got to be fixed. And does he fit the offense that they're going to move to as well?
We don't know until we get the offensive coordinator.
But this is also why, right? A lot of people are on these skill positions, and why I say fix the O-line, because 1, we're going to understand what they need to do at quarterback. But 2, it allows the new offensive coordinator to judge the players that are on contract right now, because there's going to be a cleaner pocket, there's more time to throw the ball, etc., etc. If they don't fix the O-line first, then they're going to have a problem. It's like you never start a sandwich with the meat and the salad or whatever it is. You start the sandwich with the bread, right? Yeah. So the key component is the bread, offense and defensive line. That's it.
It's been so long since I feel like the Steelers approached the draft and free agency in a rebuilding mindset.
Yeah.
But today, when Tomlin was talking, I finally got the feeling that they're like, change is necessary. And this rebuild, now Big G last night, my podcast partner, he said that the rebuild started with Omar Khan and Andy White and with the new scouting department. And then it continued with when they fired Matt Canada. So I'm going to give him that we're into this rebuild now. But this offseason, how they approach it, once they hire the offensive coordinator, if they build up the lines, offensive and defensive line, and they really focus on another cornerback to team with Joey Porter Jr., a young stud inside linebacker.
Oh, yes, please.
If they
please.
do that, of course, the strong safety, as we talked about, I'll feel like, yes, they are definitely committed to the rebuild.
But that's why I think there's guys like Deontay. If you can trade him for a second and a fourth or a second and a fifth, pull that freaking trigger, man. Like,
definitely.
Like if you can move on Cam Hayward, like I don't want to move on from Cam Hayward, but if someone's going to give you a second or a third because they don't have a defensive lineman and that's what they're missing, I'd be shocked if a team gave a second for him. But if they did, pull that freaking trigger, man. Like I almost think there's a lot of players on these two. I know people like James Daniels. I actually think he had an average year. If someone threw you a second for James Daniels, a contender needed to fill a spot, a second and a fifth for him, or a second and a future fifth, freaking do it. I also think this is the draft as well. I'm with you on not using voidable years, but I think this is the sort of draft where if you've got to trade back in from next year and swap some picks, let's say you trade a third this year to get back into the third round or get a fourth and a fifth this year and you get a fourth back the following year, fine. Like I think this is one of the most important drafts for them, and it is one of the best overall talent drafts at a number of positions that we've seen in probably the last 3 or 4 years, because there's a lot of guys that are either coming out early because they've still got the COVID year, or there's guys that are highly experienced. The next few years as well, you're going to have a lot of guys that have been in the portal that have changed college teams every couple of years. Evaluating is getting much harder, right?
Yeah.
This is one of the last crops of guys where you've got 3 or 4 years of tape in a set offense or a set defense. So I'd be going hell for leather with this draft, because this draft could make or break. It'll decide whether Tomlin gets close to a Super Bowl in this upcoming contract extension. But it will also decide quite a lot how Omar Khan's career is going to go, to be honest. I actually think this is a hugely important draft, massively important draft.
Oh, definitely. If you look at when the Cowboys rebuilt in the late 80s, early 90s, the 49ers, these teams, they hit on 2 or 3 years in the drafts in a row.
Correct. Yep.
And then they sprinkled in some free agents, in positions of need. The Steelers have prided themselves on drafting and developing talent and being great at talent evaluators. Well, that really hasn't been true for the last decade, over a decade. Now they have to get back to that. I like what I've seen out of Aaron Curry at middle linebacker coach. I do like.
I got a question on that though. I just want to pick that. I don't want to go too deep into it, but do you like what you've seen at? I don't know we're any closer on Mark Robinson. They didn't bring anyone else to develop in there. They made Michael Walker work. They didn't have Holcomb, and I get they didn't have Holcomb and Quan for most of the year. I'm really excited to see whether Holcomb can come back. But have you seen enough to feel like he will be able to develop inside linebackers if we go and draft a guy?
Well, the development part, I liked how he worked those practice squad guys in there.
Okay.
And they seemed like they communicated well. They seemed to have a closeness where they really fought for each other. If you watched the way those guys acted all year.
Yeah, totally. I'm just saying.
I did like that because they don't have the young stud.
Yeah.
Now, Mark Robertson has limitations.
Will
he be able to overcome his limitations with his strengths, which are impressive as well? But I see him play more and more at the end of the season in specific situations. I watched him in the preseason and camp when he was covering running backs. His coverage is good. He can shadow the running back out of the backfield or on wheel routes. He's really good. He struggles with tight ends still. He's no match for a good tight end. Yep. So that's something we got to see in the offseason.
Yeah.
But if you get a guy like I like Jack Campbell last year.
Yeah, me too.
If he's with the Lions and he's playing excellent.
Yep.
If you got him in there, a Chan Muma, a guy of that caliber, that nature, that ability, Muma's very much like Wilson for the Bengals.
Yep.
They both played at the same college. They play alike.
You and I both loved him.
If you get him the right.
I love Troy Anderson out of Montana State. I was like, man, if you can't get Muma, go get Troy Anderson.
Exactly.
Or go get Quay. Can you imagine Quay Walker in this defense? I mean, Quay Walker in this defense.
Well, I wrote an article about him. I wanted the Steelers to get him.
Oh my God, Quay Walker in this defense.
Guys, the right talent, I think Curry can develop it. But that remains to be seen. But it has been a problem for a decade.
Yeah. Yeah. I do like the Michigan guy, Junior Colson. I do like him. I actually think
What's he get out of Texas?
Jay Ford.
Oh, a heck of an athlete.
Oh yeah. But
and I love his intensity and he's attacking.
The only thing about Jay Ford is, and I got to go back and look at a lot of Texas tape. I would just say off when I watch, and I don't get time between the Steelers and Texas, and college tape is very hard to get, right? Yeah. Very hard to get hold of college tape. But you get the sense when I've watched the Texans as a Longhorns fan this year, I feel like he's better suited to a 4-3. I really do. Or he will be a really good sub-package linebacker, which is fine. The Steelers play a stack of sub-package. And I know that if you're playing in a 3-4, you've got someone next to you to call the shots. But I'm not fully sold on him as a 3-4 linebacker yet. I need a bit more evaluation to occur on my end.
Well, in my opinion, it sounds like what you're saying. To be a 3-4, you got to be more instinctual.
I think I wouldn't say that he's not instinctual because of the way that he flies at the ball. He doesn't make enough errors.
But there's less thinking when it's always attacking.
That's my point. I don't know whether it's like the whole Trenton Simpson thing. Trenton Simpson struggled to make decisions quickly.
Yes.
But if you gave him one thing to do, he can go and make that play because he's got the athletic ability. Yes. There's a difference there. And it's the same thing I see with Trotter. I worry about his size as a 3-4 in the AFC North. I don't worry about that with Junior Colson. But these are things that we'll be talking about between now and the draft. But there's been some great questions. 2 or 3 people have asked this. If you're prioritizing 3 positions, and it is hard because they can go after some of these in free agency, of course, as well.
Exactly.
But as we stand here today, what are the 3 positions of priority in the draft? And as well, these guys might not be drafted first, second, and third round either, because there's guys like you love Frazier, right? Yes. He's been injured, as you said. He could be anyone from the back end of the second to mid in the fourth, right? Yep. But if you're standing here today, the Steelers are on the clock right now. What are the 3 most important positions? It doesn't necessarily have to be the order that they'll pick these guys, but what are the 3 positions they've got to fill via the draft? In fact, pretend they had no money in free agency because they had so much dead cap hit because they traded all their big guys away and they've got 20 draft picks, right? Yeah. What 3 positions are you going first?
Well, for me, it's obviously it surprised me today that they did not say for sure that Broderick Jones is going.
Correct. I knew you were going to jump on that. I knew you were going to jump on that.
I was like, what? In my opinion.
But I'll tell you what. Can I give you an insight? Because I was going to do it. I was going to mention that in my show this morning, and I didn't. Do you know why they said that? I think they said that because it gives them better negotiating power, right? Yeah. When they look at free agents, if they look to get in a tackle, why it supplements what they want to do in the draft, right? If they right now that he's going to be the left tackle, then whoever's playing some right tackle for them, if that guy can play either side, will be like, well, I want left tackle money even though I'm playing right tackle, right? It gives them option, and it also means if they go and sign a left tackle, and then they're like, we're happy with that person to start. In the case that we don't like guys at the top of the draft, then they're not forced in a position where they've got to suddenly they're forced to draft a right tackle because they've already designated Broderick at left tackle. I personally would hope and be confident in the fact the Steelers see Broderick as a left tackle, but I think they're playing the strategic game right now. That's what I see. Yeah. And if I think in money wise too, a lot of people look past on the salary cap. The amount of snaps you play as a rookie affects the 4th-year contract or the 5th-year contract you get. Broderick Jones is a first-round player. So the more snaps that he potentially plays at right tackle, I mean, we're talking margins here of like less than $1 million, but it actually does affect how much you've got to pay him in the third, fourth, and fifth year. Just saying.
Oh, I agree with everything you said, and that was very insightful because that's things that we don't look at normally. I'm just fired up that they ain't saying he's the left tackle, and like you're saying, there's a long game.
Yeah.
And they're playing it. But when I watched him at right tackle the last 3 games,
yeah, totally.
You could tell his hand placement, his foot movement is out of step. He needs back on the left side. So that being said, right tackle, cornerback, and center. That's the top 3 for me. Now, what order? Well, depends on who falls where. And what happens in free agency, obviously. But for me, it's right tackle, cornerback, and center.
Mine is center, inside linebacker.
I like it, but...
Right?
Yeah.
And depending on Hayward, it's either D-line or right tackle. But I think you can bring in a tackle in free agency better than you can bring in... I think they need someone younger in the D-line. Like, cornerbacks are close fourth for me, but I'd be fine with Porter, Trice, and then going out and finding a bunch of other blokes in free agency.
But we can't count on Trice yet.
I know.
I want to, but he has to show me a year because, his last 2 years, well, he blew his knee out. Then he wore a knee brace his senior year, the whole year. And then he blew his other knee out. Now, some guys are born with weak ligaments, weak tendons. And after they get those knee replacements, they're better than ever.
Well, that's
what I'm hoping with Trice.
Yeah. Especially with that other knee, because I feel like the fact he had the previous knee injury, because that was so strong, it stuffed up the other, the other knee. Yeah. I mean, I talked about this with my physio recently when I went in and saw him, and he was talking about synthetics, and he was talking about them being too powerful and causing injuries. And I was talking to him about Corey Trice, and he was like, dude, he's 100%. That's exactly what we see. I just think he has
weak ligaments. And
that's the case with people. So I don't disagree. But I also think cornerback is one of the positions in free agency where you get best value for money. If you're going to spend 10 or 12 million on a cornerback, generally those guys are going to come closest to living up to their contracts. I think tackles and defensive ends can be few and far between. I think we've got enough old linebackers. I want a young linebacker. I think even, as I say, tackle and cornerback are 2 positions that the Steelers, yes, they need. I just feel like your money is better spent on those 2 positions in free agency than other positions, which is why.
I think you have to look at it free agency on a year-to-year basis. This year, I see some really good cornerbacks. I agree with you. I'd love to see an inside linebacker, as we've talked about, because I think that Holcomb will be back. I would be fine with Alexander and Roberts because I like all of them. But they got to get the young dude, the stud.
Yeah.
But I do not see any right tackles in this free agency that I think that you should throw the money at that it would take to sign. That's why I'd like to draft a first-round right tackle, maybe get the cornerback in free agency, and the center draft, as we talked about, maybe in the 3rd round, maybe a Frazier or a Jackson Moose Johnson, or there's some quality guys there. But like I said, I don't see the right tackles in free agency.
Well, I'll give you 2 perspectives on that, though. One, we've talked about guys they could trade. Maybe they trade for a right tackle, right? Or someone that's paying a right tackle a lot of money that wants to get that contract off the books. That's a possibility. But number 2, this draft has a lot of wide receivers in the top part, has a lot of cornerbacks in the top 30 to 50 players. John Funker says Shannon down under. I love it. Got to say that before it slips on mine. But there's a lot of guys in that cohort. Right, we know cornerbacks go high. You might be in a situation where you get a 1st round or 2nd round guy at the back of the 2nd or the start of the 3rd as well. We can tackle that as the draft process goes on. But I think this draft at a number of key positions that are coveted by NFL teams means that you're going to see some trench players slip way back in the draft. I mean, I agree with you. For instance, you said on Pump Your Brakes about Cooper de Jean, or I'm going to get his name wrong, about him not being a first rounder. I agree. I think he's an early second rounder, just like I thought,
second round, yes.
like Porter was. But he might be drafted in the first round because of how expensive corners are and how much the league loves corners. Well, that puts a person with a first round grade on them back into the second round. So I think there's there's that saying, there's many ways to skin a cat. I think there's a lot of ways to skin filling these needs. But I do agree with you that in terms of the right tackles, it's not like there's a guy glaringly there. I just think my biggest thing is get a young center and get a young inside linebacker. We need a stud inside linebacker, a guy that is fighting to be the first guy on the roster in his rookie year, but it's more like the second or the third guy that they can play in sub package, that can make 20 tackles a game. Like right now, if the Steelers with their injuries, we could never call like a guy like Klein off the couch and trust someone to make those tackles. And I am sick of seeing Minkah Fitzpatrick play box linebacker. So find someone else to do that job and let Minkah play free freaking safety. That's what I want.
They wasted the season for him this year. They wasted it.
Like, you know what free safety next to his name stands for me? It's effing safety, because they need to play him at effing safety, not linebacker. Yeah.
Well, he was the all-purpose. He was the glue guy, the do-it-all team-first guy that Edmonds used to be. And Fitzpatrick had to replace him. It shouldn't be like that. They just did not give him a suitable running mate at strong safety.
So to wrap up this show, because we'll keep it to an hour, and everyone, you'll get a live tomorrow with Marky D and I as well. And we'll also be I'll be trying to be doing a live every Thursday night from now on about 8 p.m. And Shannon and I will also continue our schedule. Sometimes it'll be live, sometimes it'll be not. So I just want to say that before we close it out. And I also want to thank all the subs, because we've hit 300 this week. Goal was 500 for the end of the season. We can still achieve that. So if you're not a sub and you're liking everything you're listening to, please hit that sub button. At least hit that like button. Lets us know whether you're liking the content, not liking it. Love the live chat today. It's been awesome. But Shannon, I guess to wrap up this week, we didn't deep dive into the Bills game, which is kind of cool because I kind of want to move on to the future as well. And I feel like the Mike Tomlin press conference set the tone. I feel like he came back. He was happy. He was relieved. Gets to do the team building. I haven't touched Madden in the last few days because I didn't want to think about football outside the channel. Now tonight I'll have some good Madden, and I'll be on to drafting and doing all those things. I'll be back loving it. But I guess, what's sort of your message to Steeler fans, like as we emerge a week on almost from the Buffalo game and into another offseason, that it is exciting. Like people, I guess one thing I'll say is that sometimes people are so negative on the rebuild and the hard times. But to have good times and to truly value them, you have to go through the tough times. And when there's that saying, when the going gets tough, the good get going, right? And now we get a chance to see who's good and who's going to get going for the Steelers, right? And it's not all doom and gloom. The team found a way to get double-digit win seasons. The team made the playoffs in a season that no one thought they'd make it, with some answers to some questions. Like, it's part of being a fan. That's what ride or die is. Ride or die is you ride no matter what happens. So what's your message to Steelers fans as we go through what's going to be a very interesting 6, 8, 12 weeks, 16 weeks going into the draft?
Well, I'd advise everybody to buckle up because, as I've said in an article, I think we're getting ready to see a Steelers offseason like none other. Some of us old enough to remember the glory days of the Steel Curtain and then the down years until they found their next franchise quarterback in Big Ben. And then we got to enjoy those. They were either winning Super Bowls or contending for Super Bowls. And honestly, they haven't been that since 2016, 2017. And it's because that they were stubbornly saying, we can rebuild without hitting rock bottom. Well, the way the NFL is set up, to get those elite picks, you've got to be pretty bad. And where the Steelers stay average, stay middle of the pack, they're not getting better and they're not getting worse. They're staying even kill, Groundhog Day average. So I think we're just from Tomlin's press conference, I am encouraged that the Steelers are honestly evaluating and looking at things from a rebuilding perspective. And if they are, we will see true change. Now, it might be next year they might go, 17 games to 6-11. But if they do, so be it, as long as they're improving and we're seeing progress, sustainable improvement. And I really think now we're closer to seeing that than we have been at any point in the last 5 or 6 years. So I would say take heart, be encouraged. Better days are on the horizon.
That's it, man. That's it. There's no other way to finish that up. All I'm going to say is go Steelers.